Reddit. Regardless of your opinion of the occult or supernatural, what is the most downright creepy or inexplicable thing that you've ever experienced? Part 2? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Every year for several years, during the winter months, we would find tracks in our backyard. Now, just to help visualize, our backyard was tiny as hell, having maybe about 20 feet from the back door, where my bedroom was, to our tiny ass garage, and a sidewalk's length of path around back that was fenced off. Fenced off on all sides, minimal room for movement, hard for anything not human to get in without a ruckus. These tracks from who knows the fuck where that would start in a random spot, come up the 2 short steps to the back door, go back a few feet and just disappear. They just started and stopped with no real trail. We have no idea what was making them, nor how or why they would have just made a few prints in a small radius with no start or end. They only ever appeared in the backyard, in that 20-foot space, not in the front or even the driveway. They looked like they belonged to a deer, but shrunken down slightly, but you'd think a deer would leave more than just a couple tracks in a tiny spot. And then, of course, there's the matter of the fences everywhere and the near impossibility of a deer going up those steps without whacking its face on the door. No one else in the neighborhood had these tracks anywhere around their homes. We lived in a small but lively city with hardly any forestry to be spoken of, and we saw a grand total of 1 deer and 1 rabbit in the 6 years we lived in that house, neither being anywhere near our home. And if this shit doesn't already sound unbelievable enough, these tracks only ever showed up at night, after it snowed. If it snowed again and covered the old tracks, more would follow shortly after. It would only ever make a single set of tracks, and more wouldn't be added unless the others disappeared. It was almost like this thing just wanted to make sure it had a mark in our yard at all times. And each time, without fail, they came up to the door. Needless to say, it creeped our family the fuck out the first time around, but after a while we took to calling it the ghost deer and just let it do its thing. We even looked forward to the appearances every year. No harm ever came of it, so we never really made an honest attempt at trying to see it or understand it. TLDR, unseen and unidentifiable creature leaves untraceable footprints in a tiny spot in our yard several times each winter for several years. Sylvan Dread. My BFF and I were into paranormal investigations and went way out in the boondocks to a place that was supposedly haunted by victims of a serial killer. We get there and nothing really happens. We go to leave and it gets weird. Suddenly we both get a distant, dissociated feeling and have an urge to go in a certain direction deeper in the woods. We get in the car and drive that way, almost in a trance. We comment about how the sun looks fake, like lights on a movie set. And we both feel like we need to get out of the car and go into the woods. We drive for about 5 minutes, it takes 20 minutes to get back. We were driving the same slow pace both directions. We drive back and forth a few times, with time being wonky each time and us feeling more drawn out and confused. Everything outside is dead quiet and unmoving. At some point one of us says something about going back to the bridge. Once we cross it, it was like a spell was broken. We were shaking and confused, and in retrospect it felt like we had been in imminent danger, although we were so blasé at the time. It felt like we were being lured. That was weird, but the feeling of being in a fake bubble was disturbing. The worst part was we both had the same thought separately during the ordeal, that if we had gone into the woods we wouldn't have just gone missing, but we felt we wouldn't have even been remembered. Saw the son do the same thing a few years later in the mountains with 2 other witnesses and hightailed it out fast that time. I woke up 2 nights ago, late at night. I didn't know what had woken me, so I just laid there, eyes shut. About 2, maybe 3 minutes go by and I hear, "Mommy," said clearly right by my head. I have kids, so thinking it was my daughter I rolled over and said, "What?" Nobody was there. I got up and all the kids were asleep soundly. There's no way that anyone could have run out of the room. The door was still shut when I rolled over. It was also definitely a real sound, because my son, sleeping in my bed, startled to the sound. Also, the feeling in my house was horrifying. I don't know what, or why, but something was there and I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching me. I went back to bed but did not sleep. Oh, and when I checked the time, 3 a.m. When I was about 5, I was sitting in the living room watching cartoons while my mom took care of my infant brother upstairs. The living room and dining room were separated by a thin divider wall, only about 3 inches wide, that ran from the floor to the ceiling. Movement caught my eye from the direction of our dining room, and I turned toward it to see an arm sticking out of the divider wall, as though someone were hiding in the dining room. The arm started motioning for me to come over to it. That's when I realized it was actually from asterisk inside the divider wall itself. I remember standing up to walk over to it, and it pulled back into the wall instantly. I peeked around the divider, and there was no one there. I ran up the stairs and told my mother that Peter Pan lived in the walls and was trying to take me away. I never saw it again, and never had any more experiences in that house. No idea what it was. I would often have these dreams of future events. It started when I was pregnant. I had a dream I was in the bathroom and I was bleeding. I kept wiping more blood and I was panicking, telling myself, please stop. A month before I would give birth, I was in the bathroom. I did my business and I noticed I was bleeding. The whole scenario played out. Thankfully, I didn't miscarry. My daughter was just trying to come out early. Went to the hospital, they stopped it for another month. The second I remember most was when my daughter was 3. I had a dream I was in a dimly lit room with a black guy having sex. In my dream, I was feeling guilty because who would leave their kid on Halloween to have sex with some guy? I also remember calling his name K. Funny thing is, didn't know anyone named K, let alone a black guy named K. Well, a year later I met this African man named K. We started dating and everything was so amazing. Halloween comes around, I go trick or treating with a few friends, their kids and my kid. Later at night, after my daughter fell asleep, my best friend told me that I should have a break and go be with K. That scenario played out. The last one I have is mild. I had a dream where I was sitting in a cubicle and leaned back to joke with some people I never met. A tall black guy and an elderly white woman. Sometime later I got a job at a call center. I sat between a guy named R, tall black guy, and an 80-year-old white woman named B, who give me rides home. Well, I took a call on the phone in my cubicle. It was dumb call, so I leaned back and told a joke. Then it hit me. Same joke. Same faces. Same cubicle from my dream. Peas. I never dream of real places. In my typical dreams, buildings and rooms are mazes. My father passed away from lung cancer when I was 10, I am 18 now. And when he got really sick, he slept downstairs in an extra bedroom we had that was just off of the living room, while my mom, brother and I still slept upstairs. Well, one night I was in the living room turning the TV and lights off and getting ready to go upstairs to go to bed, when I hear what sounds like someone heavily sprinting up the stairs. My mom, brother, and my dog and cat were all upstairs, and my dad was laying in his bed. And even if my pets weren't already upstairs, it was too loud and not the right beat to be something on 4 legs. It sounded like a person, you know? Needless to say, I shit myself. Then I went to ask my dad if he heard it, to which he replied no. I literally must have been hearing things, like how sometimes you think you hear your name being called and stuff like that, but I still remember how terrified and confused I was. I routinely had sleep paralysis in my previous house. One night I wake up and see a man standing next to the bed staring at my so. I immediately think, yay, sleep paralysis again, and close my eyes and roll over. It hits me that I've rolled over, something that's impossible with sleep paralysis. I decide to roll over to convince myself that I was just dreaming. I do so and the guy is still standing there staring. He looks at me, then slowly turns around and fades as he walks away. Now the good part. So wakes up and complains she had a terrible night's sleep, because she kept having a feeling like someone was watching her. I was staying at my grandma's house and my brother and I shared a room. We were talking about how cool it would be to see Grandpa's ghost. Sometime in the middle of the night, my brother got up for the bathroom and freaked out, saying Grandpa was in the mirror. I thought he was joking, but sure enough, I saw the mirror and Grandpa was in it. Transparent, like they are stereotypically portrayed. He was in a suit fixing his tie. I remember it so vividly. It freaked us out and we slept in a different room instead. I do not believe in supernatural stuff at all and am very skeptical, critical of ideas of an afterlife and the supernatural. But I remember this so clearly and can't explain it. I wish I could see it now that I'm older. My family having a party when I was about 14. A lot of family and friends there, so me and my twin got to invite a couple of our own friends. Both male. So everyone is in the back garden, absolutely no one in the house and absolutely no one wearing a dress. November in the UK is cold, all sat around a fire. My friend needs to get something out of his bag upstairs. He, apparently, sees my sister who is close to 30 at the time and says hello. Comes back out to see same sister sat there in trousers and a big coat. Asks how she got changed so quickly and got outside before her did. Safe to say she hadn't moved for over an hour. Turns out a couple people died in that house before we moved in, and what he saw was reported 3 times before he saw it. I've seen the girl as well, but it definitely didn't freak me like it did him. He called his dad to pick him up, and after all my mum admitted to being very good with spirits and a Ouija board. And that it by far an understatement. She just ignores them. You know how people rest their fingers on the triangle and it's all meant to be kinda in their own head? Moving it themselves? Well, try watching someone not even speak out loud and have no contact with the board and it still answers their questions. Moving on its own, and to this day my mother will not tell me 75% of what she finds out. And no, she's not that clever, bless her. No magnets, no fucking anything. I am a very logical person and there is no way. I still can't believe it. She got told she would marry into the army. That happened 5 years before I was born. She was told she would have twins. That happened. And now for some reason she will never do it in her own house. Because, it scares me, as if she knows something. She's not creepy in any way. Another strange thing is that once I went with her to a reading. Like a spiritual church. She said it was all BS, made up shit. But after some random guy walked up to her and asked if she would do a reading as he knew she was actually gifted. She declined. I don't believe any of that shit, but the way that it all happened, and I've seen it. Fucking nuts. It's like she's a different person. She can see through you if she wants. Like she's looking into your soul, but without even being creepy or trying. She actively trying to block it these days and no one knows why. She won't tell any of us. Big family with 4 kids and whatnot. The last time she did it my sister had to beg her to see it for herself. Then made her stop when my mother would stay silent and watch it all moving, spelling out a kinda code on its own. And to this day she will not tell us what she asked or what the real meaning of the response was. She's never done it since. TLDR. My mother is some sort of psychic but is scared of it for some reason and won't tell us why. This happened about 2 years ago, and every time I talk about it I still get chilly bumps. I worked in a large hotel. 300 rooms, 2 bars, 2 restaurants and a small music venue. It's a beautiful place, although because it's 50 years old things seem to constantly be in need of repair or remodel. At the time that this happened I was under a great deal of stress. My husband had recently had to start dialysis due to end-stage renal disease. Our eldest daughter had just given birth to our grandson, at 23 weeks. He weighed 1 pound 9 ounces. At his lowest point he got down to 1 pound. And, I had to work through all this. It was rough. I worked evenings, and I had come in for my shift only to realize I had not brushed my teeth. This in itself is very unusual for me, but I just grabbed a toothbrush and toothpaste and went into the bathroom that is just off the lobby. It was very slow, so I was sure I could quickly brush and get to work. The instant I entered it was chilly and seemed darker than usual, like they had decided to go with different light bulbs. I went to the sink and felt so uneasy. I could feel someone else, but I knew I was alone. I quickly started to brush and looked in the mirror to brush my tongue, and suddenly a cut appeared down the center of my tongue. And it was bleeding, and I kept spitting and rinsing, and then I felt like the room was gonna just close up on me. I spit in the sink one last time and ran out of the bathroom and into the back office. The receptionist stood up the minute she saw me with this look of concern. So I am thinking I am bleeding everywhere and I feel so unbalanced. There is a mirror farther back in the office, behind the front desk, so I am rushing to get to this mirror to see what the hell is happening in my mouth. I walk to the mirror and open my mouth. And nothing. No cut. No blood. But my face was white and I had to sit down. My chest hurt. I started to cry. It was so awful, during an already awful time. I never went in that bathroom again, and I never understood what happened. Had trouble sleeping one night when I was 6. Heart was pounding and was practically scared stiff. I could barely manage it, but every time I peeked over the covers I swear I could see the outlines of maybe 4 or 5 giant owls standing in my room, small room too. They looked like they were leaning over slightly because they were so tall they would touch the ceiling. Phewick that night. Pretty sure I stayed awake till sunrise. No wonder I never did well in school. When I lived at my mom's house, the house was in the middle of Missouri forest, 5–10 minutes outside of town, at least 3/4 mile walk to the neighbors. My room was on the ground floor, complete opposite side of the house from anyone else, and I always like to have my windows open slightly for fresh air, and window blinds down to cover all but the open part. So I wake up one night, 100% certain someone was watching me from where the windows were open, and I told myself they would leave as long as I didn't move. I know now, looking back on it, that it was just sleep paralysis, but it still freaked me out. So I was put on Ambien for a long time due to my disability not allowing me to sleep. It really messed with my head, and after long-term use I started hallucinating. First, patterns in the tile would move. Which wasn't so bad. The murals on my wall would sway or spin, or act out like they were alive. My blankets would crawl, the curtains would ripple, and I would have heavy memory loss. I still needed to sleep despite all this, so I stayed on. As nights got worse, my hallucinations and my ability to differentiate between reality and everything else faded. I'd go into paranoid OCD-like trances, where I would stack things in front of my rabbit's cage so she could get out, despite having locks. It all came to a stop when, one night I witnessed a full-grown figure in my room, that kinda resembled an SCP. I was beyond terrified. I have a few, but I will tell you too. I don't believe in supernatural shit and I'm not religious in the least. I'm typing on my phone, so apologies for the formatting. My grandmother, her sister, and my dad and aunt, when they were kids, took place in Scotland. They wanted to go on a weekend vacation by the seaside and they saw an ad in the paper for a house rental. All comms were done by letters then, so they wrote the person and he responded by letter and agreed on time and price. They arrived to the rental house and met the person to get the keys. Dad and aunt were playing with a stray dog in the area. Dad remembers going to neighbor farmhouse to get milk. The house they rented was a big old house with bedrooms upstairs. Dad asked adults if they could bring the dog inside for the night. Adults said okay, but dog couldn't sleep in the bedroom. The adults stayed in one room and kids in the other across hall. During the night, there was horrifying sounds of stomping at the bottom of the stairs. The kids ran to adults' room. There was also a sound of a large chain being dragged along the floor, towing something heavy behind it like a chest. The chain was being dragged upstairs and chest thumping up and down the stairs. The loud sounds went all night. They were screaming in terror. At daybreak the sound stopped. They packed up quickly and went downstairs. The poor dog was absolutely terrified, shaking and hair standing on end. They opened the door and the wee doggy ran for the hills. They left the house and went back home. They told their husbands, but they didn't believe them. The story was told over and over. Finally, a year later, aunt and their husbands drove out to the seaside town. They drove up to the lot, however, there was no house there. There was a large full-grown oak tree in the middle of the lot where the house was. They were perplexed. They went to the neighbor's farmhouse where my dad got milk and asked the family where the house was. Confused, they replied that a house was never there. They lived on the farm for 20 years and it was always an empty lot. So many weird things about this story, like they traversed some parallel time. I interviewed every family member involved separately and they all recalled the story very similar. Similar details, etc. 2. My dad had terminal non-Hodgkin's cancer and the doc gave him 2 months to live. He had tumors in his armpits, groin, back, stomach and bowels. He had a miraculous recovery at the hospital, which was preempted by a vivid and powerful experience with a being. He said it started with liquid energy blasting in through his eyes and all through his body. His whole body was shaking on the hospital bed. He had visions of vivid red supernatural landscapes. It was so beautiful but incredibly intense that he couldn't keep his eyes closed anymore. He opened them and it stopped. I remember him calling home at 2 a.m. and I answered the phone. He was crying and laughing and telling me over and over that the most incredible thing just happened. The next day the docs came in to do some tests. They did some blood work, then a physical, then some scans. More docs came into the room and all totally baffled and told him that there was no sign of cancer in his body. My dad said, "I know, can I go home now?" That was over 25 years ago. I was on a Eurail train in Slovenia with my friend and we were the only people in the train car. We were facing each other in our seats, so he could see one door and I could see the other. Suddenly, this kooky old lady startles us by interrupting our conversation from across the aisle, while holding a huge Flemish giant rabbit. Now this thing was the size of a border collie, and this lady looked like George Clinton. Are you going to tell me we didn't notice her when we sat down? Because we sure as shit didn't see her walk into the train car. In the early 1990s I was a child living in the East Bay. California, with my parents in a large apartments complex. My grandmother also lived in the complex, and during the day after school, she babysat me. In the evenings, my dad would walk me home. It was one such night that we happened to be stopped, he chatting with a neighbor, and myself seated on a bench staring at the sky. As I watched, a round disc-shaped craft, with lights around the edge flew overhead. I remember it rotated, it flew due east over, and I thought, so they do look like that. I never once alerted the adults. I just sat quiet as a mouse in validated awe. One of my biggest regrets in life is not pointing it out or saying anything. My mother told me that when I was very tiny, around preschool age, I would say things to her like, "Don't you remember when we all wore long skirts and all the men carried guns on their hips?" I was very confused that she told me that she didn't remember ever living like that. A few years ago, I lived in a house that was haunted. I knew something was up the first night I slept over. I had poured a bathtub of water and opened the bathroom cabinet to find the little shelves were not attached and just leaning inside the cabinet. I decided I'd fiddle with them later and took my bath. When I got out of the bathtub, mind you, I was the only person in the bathroom. Those little shelves were in place, screwed in that cabinet. I was like, well. When I casually brought it up to my landlord, who'd grown up in that house, he got this look on his face and he admitted the place was haunted. He'd seen a shadow man when he was a boy, but I never saw any kind of figure or shapes. Things would happen like drawers and cabinets popping open and closed. The front gate opened for me once and then closed itself behind me. I'm still mad I never got it on video, but the ghost didn't perform on command. You might not see any activity for days and then out of nowhere something would happen. That being said, I never felt imperiled or threatened or anything. It was more that the ghost was a bit of a scamp. He did things like dump the towel in the middle of the bathroom floor, stuff like that. I saw my sister's doppelganger. I was like 5'6", yo. I went out of the bathroom and started looking for my sister, so I was running around the house calling her. I went to the living room and saw her sitting on a chair. I ran towards her calling her, but I got no response, which was weird. When I came closer, I realized that the way she was sitting was unnatural. She was really stiff and haven't moved at all. I don't think she was even breathing. But what took my attention were her eyes. They looked dead. She was staring blankly at the wall and didn't even notice me. I called her again, but she didn't even blink. I tried to touch her, but as my fingers were getting closer to her, I was getting more and more scared. I finally panicked and ran to my parents' room screaming, looking for my mom. My sister was sitting there playing on our PC. I asked her what was she doing in the living room, but she had no idea what I was talking about, so I brushed it off. Years later, I've told my ex about it and he have told me that everything matches the description of a doppelganger except for her clothes. The doppelganger was wearing a pajama while my sister was wearing normal clothes.